Ankara strikes at Moscow. Erdogan intervenes in the war and disrupts Putin's plans. Kazakhstan rises up against Russia. Tokayev hits the Kremlin with an oil hammer. Putin is on his knees. The collapse of Kremlin influence continues. Turkey is ready to send its army to Ukraine. A new knife in Putin's back. Kazakhstan demands peace without Putin's blackmail. The Kremlin is searching for salvation. Putin begs Indonesia for support. Allies are fleeing. Russia is sinking into international isolation. I'll tell you all the details in just a moment. Hello, this is Ukraine Today, and I am Victoria Apanchenko, bringing you the latest events. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan spoke at the International Forum for Peace and Trust in Ashgabat, where he declared Ankara's readiness to help end the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Our sincere desire is to end the war between our northern neighbors, Russia and Ukraine, with whom we have long-standing ties and relations. These are based on mutual respect. We are ready to provide concrete support for diplomatic initiatives aimed at a ceasefire and peace, first and foremost, the Istanbul process.
Meanwhile, Putin is rushing to bow before Erdogan. The two are supposed to meet in Afghanistan. It's interesting what the bunker dweller will be begging from Turkey this time. Let me remind you, the last meeting between the Kremlin's master and the Turkish president took place at the beginning of September in China. The Kremlin also sweetened the prospect of a possible future meeting between the presidents.
The Turkish president, in his speech, spoke about Turkey's readiness and desire to continue its mediating efforts and to support the peace process, which is welcomed by our country.
It is noteworthy that from the very first days of Russia's war against Ukraine, Turkey has used all diplomatic means to establish a just and lasting peace.
From the very beginning of the war against Ukraine, Turkey has used all diplomatic means to establish a just and lasting peace between the parties. We are working together. Our efforts in this direction are known to the whole world. From now on, we will do everything possible, guided by the motto, in war, there are no winners, and in a just world, there are no losers.
Meanwhile, Russia is losing out on exports. Ukrainian drones forced Kazakhstan to bypass Moscow. Ukrainian drones struck the seaport of Novorossiysk, damaging the infrastructure used for oil shipments. After that, Kazakhstan decided to export raw materials directly to China, bypassing Russia. The first 50,000 tons of crude oil from the large Kashagan field will be delivered directly to China in December. The crude oil will be supplied through the Atasu-Alashanku pipeline by the company operating at the Kashagan field. About 30,000 tons will be exported by a Chinese firm and another 20,000 tons by a Japanese company. Kazakhstan's Ministry of Energy has confirmed that they are currently seeking additional routes for transporting Caspian oil due to damage at the marine terminal in Novorossiysk. By the way, Kazakhstan welcomes the intensification of negotiations regarding the war between Ukraine and Russia. This was stated by President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. He believes that the world order will only become stable if there is a rejection of militaristic rhetoric. The head of state noted that at a recent meeting of the president, the main provisions of the peace pact are being actively discussed in both Russia and the United States. In the president's opinion, this indicates the emergence of an opportunity to end the war.
It is now clear that a just and sustainable world order will only become a reality when narratives about inevitable global confrontation and even nuclear war are rejected. And the language of peace, trust, and cooperation will replace militaristic rhetoric.
The president believes it is important for the major powers to show political will and call on UN member states to begin a large-scale dialogue.
At the recent 8th Congress in Astana, Kazakhstan put forward an initiative called the Movement for Peace. Essentially, this is an appeal to end military violence and to seek peaceful solutions in the spirit of collective responsibility to future generations.
Moreover, Kazakhstan continues to put pressure on the Kremlin. The country has introduced new export control rules that will be in effect for 1 year. The initiative is aimed at restricting the re-export of dual-use goods to Russia and minimizing the risks of circumventing sanctions.
Astana is strengthening its coordination with the European Union in the area of preventing sanctioned transit, while at the same time trying to maintain a balance between its Western partners and Moscow. Kazakhstan is not formally joining the sanctions. However, it is demonstrating a willingness to narrow Russia's access channels to goods that are critically important for its defense industry.
Notably, Turkey is ready to send its army to Ukraine, another stab in the back for Putin from Erdogan. With each passing day, Ankara is moving further away from Moscow and drawing closer to Kyiv, Washington, and Brussels. How this is affecting the course of the Russian-Ukrainian war, find out next.
Recep Erdogan has once again stabbed Putin in the back. The president of Turkey did this right after his latest meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. At that time, both leaders, behind closed doors, according to the press, they discussed a number of very important issues regarding a ceasefire in Ukraine and subsequent security guarantees for official Kyiv. Both President Erdogan and his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, stated that the talks were constructive and positive, although no real details about the negotiations themselves were provided. This sparked an even greater wave of rumors in political circles. While some supposedly reliable sources claimed that Erdogan was trying to persuade Zelensky to accept capitulation and agree to the Kremlin's proposal, others, on the contrary, insisted that the Turkish president was discouraging the Ukrainian leader from accepting Putin's peace plan and was urging an increase in military production.
They also discussed the growing defense cooperation, stating that the results of this cooperation will be seen in the future. And
here is the result. The Turkish Ministry of Defense has officially announced its readiness to deploy troops in Ukraine. The troops are reportedly on high alert. Ankara is ready to send a contingent as soon as tomorrow.
wherever there is a need for peace, security, and stability, the first thing that comes to mind is the Turkish armed forces. This is the clearest evidence of the capabilities, effectiveness, deterrent potential, and authority, the Turkish Air Force.
It seems that Erdogan has made his choice. He deserves credit for that. All these years, he has skillfully managed to sit on two chairs at once. He managed to help Ukraine while at the same time buying energy resources and weapons from Moscow. And all the while being a member of NATO.
In the first few years of this conflict, Erdogan stated that he is essentially the only person who has good relations with both Moscow and Ukraine, is a member of NATO, and also has close ties with Washington.
However, the further things go, the harder it gets, and Erdogan is much less inclined to continue his friendship with the bloody Russian dictator. After the latest sanctions imposed on Russia, Ankara can no longer buy oil and gas in the previous volumes at discounted prices, which means there is no longer any need to coddle Putin and Russia. Turkey has none at all.
It is worth noting that in the past few months, Turkey's relations with Moscow seem to have cooled somewhat. Erdogan still communicates with Putin, but not as often as before. There are fewer personal meetings. And one of the factors contributing to this is that with Trump's election as president, Turkey has significantly improved its relations with Washington. And especially the personal ties between Erdogan and Trump have become very close.
But for the Kremlin, the growing friendship between Trump and Erdogan threatens to be disastrous. Without the blessing of the Turkish president, Russia could lose out on huge volumes of grey imports and dual-use goods, among other things, which are actively brought in through Turkey.
The process of restricting and reducing economic contacts with Russia is underway in all areas. Turkey was Russia's largest partner for a long time, not only in the energy sector, but also there is simply a colossal amount of economic interaction there. But Turkey will also be cutting back.
As for aid to Ukraine, it seems that Ankara is giving its companies the green light here. After the loud statements from the Turkish Ministry of Defense about sending its contingent to our country, a number of Turkish companies simultaneously announced plans to establish joint military production. So it's not out of the question that very soon, regarding Russian oil refineries, not only Ukrainian but also, until recently, Kremlin-friendly Turkish missiles and drones will be flying deep behind enemy lines.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Kazakhstan versus Russia. There was a time when Astana was completely under Moscow's influence, but now it meets with Trump in the White House and speaks to Putin from a position of strength about how the pseudo-empire lost yet another ally in the form of Kazakhstan. More on this in our report.
Kazakhstan, once friendly to Putin, is supplying weapons to Ukraine. The former head of Romania's National Guard for Environmental Protection, Octavian Berceanu, claims he was offered 10 million euros for a deal to import ammunition from Kazakhstan. The Russian-made ammunition was allegedly going to be repainted and sold to Europe for further delivery to Ukraine.
Kazakhstan is distancing itself from the war in Ukraine. Moreover, at one point, Ukrainian President Zelensky stated that he had offered the Russian dictator a meeting in Astana. To this, the president of Kazakhstan responded that his country is not a mediator between Russia and Ukraine. But if there is a political necessity, then accordingly Kazakhstan will provide its own territory for such an event. A meeting at the level of the heads of the two states.
According to Bashanov, he reported the offer to the criminal prosecution authorities and the National Anti-Corruption Directorate. At the same time, there was allegedly talk of another matter as well, the opening of a weapons or ammunition factory on the territory of Romania.
At the moment, it should be noted that Kazakhstan has chosen a strategy of lobbying between the interests of its key political partners. These are first and foremost the United States, Russia, and China. It should be noted that despite Kazakhstan being a CSTO country and moreover, the Tokayev regime having come to power essentially on Russian bayonets, Kazakhstan is currently pursuing an almost independent policy from the Russian Federation.
Meanwhile, following the Central Asia-US summit, Kazakhstan concluded deals worth $17 billion.
We are talking about rare earth metals. First of all, about tungsten. In addition, agreements on cooperation in the field of IT technologies and a possible memorandum on the sale of 30 Boeing aircraft were signed.
The president of Kazakhstan believes that the current US administration has a greater understanding of the importance of Central Asia, and he praised Trump for his more accommodating approach toward Russia. At the same time, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev calls a ceasefire in Ukraine possible and even praised Putin for his flexibility.
Kazakhstan was actually the very first OPEC country to significantly increase its oil production, despite the ongoing global economic challenges and the prevailing sentiment among other member nations to maintain current output levels. This prompted a corresponding response from the Russian side. This, in turn, triggered further chain reactions, namely the decision by OPEC countries themselves to increase oil production, which consequently led to a decrease in prices and massive economic losses for the Russian Federation.
Kazakhstan is trying to maintain relations with both Russia and the United States by adopting a strategy of remaining silent about the war. But at the same time, Kazakhstan does not support our country to the same extent as other European partners, who consistently send aid packages to Ukraine.
The West is locked out for Putin. He is losing control over the East completely, so he has to resort to begging, for example, from Indonesia, especially when the president of Indonesia flew to meet with Putin for the second time in a year. And importantly, during the meeting with the president, Putin highlighted their relationship. In the military technical sphere, what is behind this convoluted wording, and why is the bunker dweller himself now preparing to fly to Indonesia?
While the West increases sanctions and international pressure, Russia is establishing a new axis of cooperation. And this time, the second key meeting took place in the Kremlin with the president of Indonesia. Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto is once again in Moscow. And this is already the second time this year. This time they discussed energy, agriculture and military cooperation. But what is really behind this visit?
Of the various hidden motives, the only truly plausible possibility that seems apparent to me is the existence of specific agreements concerning the extradition of individuals who ultimately end up in Indonesia, particularly at the explicit request of the relevant Russian authorities, which would be a significant development.
But of course, not a single meeting between Putin and the leaders of other countries goes without military technological discussions. We
have traditionally had very reliable relations in the field of military technical cooperation. Indonesia is our traditional partner in this area. These relations are developing and are at the level of good professional cooperation.
Of course, the Kremlin is eager to expand such deals, especially now when the Western market is closed. In
the first place, of course, it's various military equipment. In fact, whether it's airplanes or tanks, whatever they need, one way or another, Russia will still be able to produce something. And in a situation where budget problems are growing by the day, having a country to which you can supply weapons is rather a plus.
Putin also did not overlook the Indonesian people living in Russia. In
our universities, including military academies, Indonesian specialists are constantly being trained, and we are ready to expand this cooperation.
But what could this mean?
Today, Putin is catastrophically short of cannon fodder. That's why, among the behind-the-scenes negotiations, there may be discussions about how Indonesian citizens could fight in the Russian army. I wouldn't rule out that such shadow negotiations have taken place. What would be the format so that the state, I mean Indonesia, doesn't get too tainted by this story?
The Kremlin dictator also confirmed his willingness to help Indonesia with its plans to develop nuclear energy and to build its first nuclear power plant.
This is extremely profitable for the Kremlin. And again, let's not forget about Rosatom, right? These days, it's also a cash cow for people close to Putin. Rosatom is kind of a serious contributor to the Russian budget. And accordingly, yes, of course, the expansion of Rosatom's influence in the world is something that deeply concerns and worries Putin.
The Indonesian leader also invited Putin to visit.
I would like, from the bottom of my heart, to invite you to visit Indonesia at a time that is convenient for you. Perhaps this could be possible in 2026 or 2027. We will adjust to your schedule and would be very happy to welcome you to our country.
There was even a playful jab at the bunker dweller.
You can't just keep flying to India after all.
The thing is, just last week, Putin visited India, where similar issues were discussed: trade, military cooperation, and economic ties.
This is a planned tour to gather some trump cards for negotiations with Trump. Because in its foreign policy strategy, the Trump administration has explicitly stated that their main interest is the Pacific region. And so, where is Putin right now in the Pacific region? Indonesia, India.
Thus, in order not to lose one of the last major buyers of Russian oil, Putin had to make serious concessions.
Putin promised India stable oil supplies and discounts of up to $20 per barrel.
It turns out that the meeting with India and Indonesia was no coincidence. Moscow is strengthening its contacts, wherever possible. India is getting favorable terms for oil. Indonesia is getting access to technology and grain. And Russia is strengthening its partnership.
Putin decided to gather some geopolitical trump cards in order to counterbalance the situation with Ukraine, which is proving quite difficult because Putin does not want to make any concessions on the Ukrainian issue. That means he needs to gather some other trump cards to force or convince Trump to not only abandon Ukraine, but also Europe. To abandon not only Ukraine, but also Europe.
What do you think about the latest events? We look forward to your comments. There's more to come. Stay tuned for the main news and don't forget to like. Wishing you peaceful skies above.